Everyone preaches, love thy neighbor. Everybody opposes the oppression of capitalism, colonialism, and every other ism out there. Countless people who couldn't point Ukraine out on a map are now chanting glory to the Ukraine. An obscene amount of people who didn't care about the British monarchy are now protesting its existence. The moment evil rears its ugly head, the public pays its full attention solely to it, usually leaving the victims as an afterthought. Nobody cares about the victims, because they're faceless statistics, to be flaunted in opposition to the charming and charismatic faces of the darker side of humanity. Again and again I've seen this happen, as the portraits of the things that took my nephew, portraits I've provided the authorities, are displayed all over the news. It's always that monster whose face they show. It's always the stupid nickname they gave the murderer that I keep hearing. The Gray Woman, the Child Cannibal, Fish's granddaughter, and so forth. I've yet to hear anyone mention Arthur Coughlin, or any of the other kids she took. Nobody cares about my nephew. He's a statistic. They found the dead kid decomposing in a ditch with 5 other kids' corpses. They act like it's meant to protect the children and their families from reprisal, or to protect the identities of the minors. It's all BS. There's no ratings, there's no outrage in showing the faces of some nameless victims. They don't matter, and neither do their families. Arthur's mother, my sister Annie, she's dead. She killed herself, unable to cope with the grief of losing her son. She couldn't stand seeing the face of that bitch who took her kid. She couldn't look at herself in the mirror in the last few months of her life because nobody could find, see, or know anything about that woman. She was too mundane, too average to be noticed, too slick to be caught, too monotone to even attract attention. My camera caught her on video, in the act, and yeah, she's just an average Jane Doe you couldn't tell from a crowd of Jane Does. Dark, middle-length hair, average-sized eyes, average head, average body type. Simply unremarkable. It all started about 3 years ago, when Arthur kept complaining to Anne that he'd been seeing someone coming to him at night. A lady is what he called it, describing it to be nothing short of a mundanely dressed human being. He kept telling Anne that whenever she showed up, he wouldn't be able to move for a while in her presence, and would only regain mobility once she faded into darkness. Seeing as how it was my sister's son, she couldn't convince him that there was night terrors or sleep paralysis. The kid was adamant that something was watching him, and that's where I came into the picture. I offered to place cameras all over the house to prove to him that nothing was haunting him at night. After that, we finally quelled his fear of the demonic lady that was disrupting his sleep. I showed him the footage recorded during nights the strange apparition frequented him. At first, he argued the surveillance footage couldn't see ghosts, but eventually he relented and learned to deal with his reoccurring nocturnal inconveniences. The nagging stopped, and everything was fine in the world again. Until one morning, I got a call from my sister, right after finding out I had 10 missed calls from different relatives. Annie was frantic and panicking. Her voice was cracking as she choked out her own tears and was on the verge of losing her battle against exhaustion. Arthur had disappeared. He was nowhere to be found. No one had seen him, not the neighbors, not any acquaintances, nobody, nothing. As if the world had simply swallowed him. Without even thinking, I raced for Annie's, nearly killing myself in my reckless driving to reach my sister. Once I got there, we were both erratic, and my mind and body flew on autopilot. I pulled out everything the cameras had recorded and started searching for whatever had happened to Art the night before. He was in bed by 8:30. Everything was fine and uneventful for the next 5 hours. We all watched in dread and horror as a figure suddenly appeared in frame in his room, as if out of nowhere, a shadow crawling out of nothingness and taking the shape of a person in the recording. I rolled it back multiple times and couldn't find anything or anyone breaking in or entering. She just appeared. The next few minutes became the most haunting moments of my life. Anne, my parents, and I all watched the footage of this figure approaching Art's bed and picking him up before turning and facing the camera, smiling at it and leaving the room, disappearing once again from sight. The way she looked, the way she moved, the way she picked up the kid and left, everything was normal, mundane, unassuming, average to the point of eeriness. Anne completely broke down. She wept and cursed at the screen and wailed for her child to be returned to her. Our parents tried to comfort her, as I did my best to describe what I'd seen to the police. The manhunt for that bitch had begun. Unfortunately, it yielded nothing but a pile of dead bodies. 3 weeks after the disappearance of Art, we found his body, with the remains of 5 other kiddos. All of them were in varying stages of decomposition. The oldest remains were completely skeletal. The face of that monstrosity was everywhere. News, posters, papers, everywhere. She'd infected the entire universe with her presence. Yet, nobody had ever found anything. Not even a trace or a thread leading to her. Absolutely nothing. It's almost as if she never existed. 3 months after Art's death, I became a father. 2 years later, I fathered twins, and never recovered. 6 months ago, the last straw broke the camel's back, and Anne took her own life. When I found her, she had a poster of the ghoul paused on her TV screen. She hanged herself, unable to bear seeing the growing legend of this monster again and again, while simultaneously seeing her child's memory fading into obscurity. I didn't have it much easier. All this grief, all this pain, it was taking a toll on me, and I noticed myself developing a habit of drinking a bit too much. If my wife hadn't found me hanging by one hand from our 4th-story apartment, I would probably be dead. It wasn't intentional, I don't think so at least. I don't remember enough to know. I've toned down my drinking since, and I never drink alone anymore, now that I have kids to raise. No matter how much better my life has gotten, one thing seems to get worse. I think I've conditioned myself to dread the diabolic face of that monotone creature. With every viewing of her portrait, I felt more and more uncomfortable around them. I don't know if it's the paternal instinct or what, but I just came to a point where I can't stand looking at that unremarkable face anymore. It makes my skin crawl, despite its averageness. It all came to a head a few days ago, as I was walking back home from a football game. It was raining, and I was lost in my thoughts when I bumped into someone. We apologized to each other, and only then I saw the person in front of me. My body and soul froze, pins and needles pricked my skin, and a rock formed in my throat, threatening to suffocate me right there. The pounding of my heartbeat echoed in my ears as I watched the world turn still and black. My gaze locked into the mass of humanity in front of me, average in stature and size, the empty yet piercing eyes, violating and welcoming all at once, far more terrifying than any psychopathic stare. The unassuming evil yet innocent smile formed with that mauve, unmatched yet improbable malevolence, the monotonous and monochrome presence of an impossible humanoid shape was obviously inhuman, yet so very human. A stifling sensation of fear paralyzed me as I stared into the non-existent soul of the misanthrope that had taken the life of my nephew, that could have committed an entire genocide with its stare alone. An eerie calm emanated from this human-shaped nightmare and turned my entire body into stone as it smiled at me. Time froze all around us for a second, and it felt like an eternity while my life was being sucked into that black hole that constituted the eyes of this devil that took so much from me. I came face to face with the woman that took so much from me, and found myself being paralyzed by the terrifying shadow of mundanity that surrounded her until she finally retreated from sight back into nothingness.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's video. If you enjoy the channel, why not go ahead and subscribe? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky stuff we do here. Maybe leave a comment too if you feel so inclined. Me, and of course the algorithm, always like when you interact. How about another video? I'm sure you could be down for that. Why not click on one of the videos above and get a little more spooky today? If you'd be interested in getting a copy of my latest book, there's a link below. There's also a link to my Reddit page where you can read some of my other stories that I've put out. Before we go, let's go ahead and thank our wonderful patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. And thanks to Xaronana, Emily Coltsfoot, Leslie Lou Riddle, Martha, and Marianne Schuler for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks to you all. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the show, then I always recommend you come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can take advantage of all the wonderful things we do there. There's all kinds of unique content that you only get if you're part of my Patreon, so come on down and see what all the fuss is about. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.